and I can not be recorded introducing, which is great. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Jen. So if you can keep your presentation to around 20 minutes so that we've got time to interrogate you.
Thank you, Stephen, and welcome everybody. I'll just share screen, and I will apologise if I have some difficulties with presenting with the internet connection today. My internet is not good in my room, so let's hope it holds out. As Stephen said...
Giấy xong đó còn xài nào không? Mấy dục bỏ để hoài.
Oh. Tu, you might need to turn off your... Yeah, there we go. Lovely. So, as Stephen said, and please tell me if I freeze or drop out, okay? That's important because we could hand over to Stephanie while I get myself sorted. Resisting research evidence-based deficits. Yes, Stephen, it is an interesting task that we undertook, and it does speak to the responsibility that you mentioned. What we basically wanted to do was look at a Teacher Professional Association journal that both Beryl and I have published in, and that Libby is also familiar with. So Libby is a master's graduate from Griffith University. She's a teacher and a teacher librarian and an English teacher and grammar expert, and you know Beryl and myself. And so we answered the call to submit a paper to a special issue in a journal called English in Education. And the special issue was around English teacher subject associations. So it was a fairly broad call for papers. And this is from the editorial on the screen. And we decided to look at the flagship journal of the Australian Association of Teachers of English. Now, the AATE is very active. It's got a very large membership across Australia, and it has chapters in each state. Very active in the English teaching space. And the journal, it used to be called English in Education, it used to be called, oh gosh, I can't even remember what the original name of it was. English in Australia. It's now called Australian Journal of English Education, or AJEE. And it's a widely read journal by both academics and teachers, librarians, students, all manner of people read this journal, which is part of its strength. And also it's part of why we wanted to look at it as part of the Australian context. So the abstract to our article, and I'm not going to go through the whole article, I'm going to cherry pick some bits that I think will be interesting to look at from the point of view of analysing evidence in research journals. So in our paper, we consider the research evidence base informing teaching practice and policy in subject English in schools. We chose the Australian Journal of English Education, which I said is our flagship research publication. And we did this because we know that evidence for all teaching, not just English, is in high demand at the moment. Our aim was to understand the research outputs that are valued by the authors, editors, etc. We analysed the research published from the release of the Australian Curriculum English in 2014 until the end of 2022. We ended up analysing 139 research articles according to Bernstein's message systems of curriculum, pedagogy and assessment. We also brought to it Biester's theory of research evidence deficits. So we considered the theories, methods and recommendations made in light of increasingly recognised deficits in the research evidence base around knowledge, efficacy and application. Our findings, very pleasantly, indicate robust engagement with highly contextualised research, making visible the transformative work of English teachers. We kind of had a hunch that that's what we would find because of our long association with this journal. And just to be clear, none of us were editors of this journal. We know that at the moment, evidence is seen as an interesting word, if not a dirty word. And many of us are engaging with looking at the nature of what evidence is. Educational research has been heavily influenced by the pressure to generate an indisputable evidence base to lead changes in policy and practice. ERO defines evidence-based teaching as teaching practices that research has shown will have the greatest impact on student learning. However, we know scholarship is calling the preoccupation with certain evidence and the nature of this evidence into question. And this has been going on for many, many, many years, going back to Slavin in 2002, who argued that while a lot of policymakers and educators often call for experimental research, where programs and practices can be evaluated and replicated, that more descriptive, largely qualitative research is equally needed to inform our policy and practice. And you may have seen very recently in the AARE blog EduMatters, Professor Russell Tyler from Deakin is once again calling into question the evidence promulgated by groups such as ERO. And I highly recommend reading that EduMatters blog, and the link there is on the screen. So what did we do? We took a couple of theoretical lenses, Bernstein's message systems, and some theoretical concepts from Biester from his 2020 work called Why What Works Still Won't Work, from evidence-based education to value-based education. It's quite an interesting read. And so these two layers of theory allowed us to describe the articles according to the topic, and then to analyse how the research articles manage the deficits inherent in research work. Once again, we use Bernstein and Biester, and Biester's three deficits in the argument for for evidence-based education are threefold: knowledge deficit, efficacy deficit, and application deficit. And I'll just explain what they are, and then I'll show you how we mobilise them in our work. Biester presented in 2010 a tripartite problematization of what is commonly seen as evidence base. He talks about knowledge deficit, and he says a knowledge deficit exists because knowledge about actions, for example, ways of teaching, and consequences, example, learning, can only provide possibilities and not certainties. Put another way, research evidence can point out what worked in the past but cannot dictate future action. So his work really troubles this notion of what is knowledge. And he argues that certainties should be treated with suspicion, because we can only provide possibilities from our research. He also suggests that an efficacy deficit exists in relation to context and conditions surrounding practice. And the efficacy deficit is framed on the understanding that social interactions, such as teaching, are open systems, so the action to consequence loop can never be predetermined. And lastly, the application deficit exists when the actual work of applying knowledge to transform practices remains opaque, vague, not tangible. So a fundamental issue, he asserts, is that knowledge is not a depiction of a static world out there, but that it is relational, transactional, functional, and ever evolving. So we thought those three problematizations of the evidence base were interesting, and we wanted to look at this particular journal and how the research sort of shaped up in view of those three concepts. So we took those three ideas and we determined some questions that we could put to the data, and here they are. And we kind of flipped them a little, and I'll explain how that worked out. So we took the knowledge deficit notion and we said to ourselves, as we read through the 139 articles, are these articles assuming knowledge possibilities that need to be explored further rather than abstract certainties? We then took the efficacy deficit idea and we said, do the articles recognise the complex contextual conditions that shape knowledge and practice in open, non-deterministic systems such as schools. And finally, the application deficit. We said, are the articles seeking to make visible the everyday work of knowledge application and practice transformation in English education? So it was a really interesting deep dive into this one journal over the 10 years. The research questions were: what topics, methodologies, theoretical approaches and recommendations have trended in the journal across those years? And how do the articles present research as evidence in terms of knowledge, efficacy and application? Just very quickly, when we did our Bernsteinian take on the papers, we saw that this was the spread across curriculum, pedagogy and assessment. 47% were about pedagogy, 24% were about curriculum, 6% were about assessment, and 23% about other. And I think that speaks a lot to this journal, that it's very interested in application, and that came through in the findings. So 47%, more than half the paper, almost half the papers were about pedagogic application. In terms of distribution of the 3 message systems across the years, you can see there in this graph from 2014 to 2022, the kind of trends across how many papers were about pedagogy. We saw a spike in 2015 and also 2016. There were lots about pedagogy. Assessments sort of sprinkled throughout with a bit of a peak in 2018, etc. So we wanted to sort of see what that looked like across those years. You're not supposed to be able to read this, but I wanted to show you how we charted the data. We had a huge spreadsheet with many more columns with other bits and pieces in them. But just so you can see, we literally had a wonderful time creating this spreadsheet with all of the articles that we determined were research articles in the paper, in the journal, and we then organised them through conceptual lenses, methodologies and recommendations. We couldn't look at findings, there were just too many to do justice to, but we felt that looking at conceptual lenses, methodologies and recommendations would really help us answer our questions and do a thorough look at the way this journal was presenting research to its readership. I'm going to focus on theory today, and just because I think it's fascinating actually what we found, the theoretical lenses used in the papers in this particular journal. There was a very wide and rich range of theoretical lenses used. Firstly, we had lots of what we call well-established or grand theories, and you can see in that top paragraph some very familiar names to us working in education research. There were other papers that didn't necessarily list a particular theoretical underpinning, but drew on more broad paradigmatic and theoretical categories, such as sociocultural perspectives, post-structuralism, post-colonialism, feminism, etc. Others drew on less frequently pursued conceptual framings, things such as spatial theories, queer theories, post-human and new materialism, affect theories, etc., as you can see. And I'm sorry, I don't know why that keeps flipping backwards. You can see on that final paragraph there some less frequently pursued conceptual framings. What was also interesting were, of course, for this particular journal, quite a few theorisations that would be very familiar in the discipline of English. And for those of you who are not in the discipline of English, you might recognise some of these and not others, but you would expect to find theoretical lenses that would mirror the discipline interest of the journal. And if you did this exercise in your own journal, you would find that this would be the case, no doubt. What was also interesting were some very specific theories that were being used in the articles to generate new knowledge. And just a cursory glance down that list will show you. I hadn't heard of some of these theoretical lenses, so it was really interesting to see how the authors had taken them up to interrogate curriculum or pedagogy or assessment or the other topics they were interested in. I'll just give you 10 seconds to have a look at that list. Some of them you may be familiar with. So the picture we gathered from this was a very wide range of theoretical lenses being brought to the data. To then go back to Beester's 3 research evidence deficits, we asked these questions. Are the articles assuming knowledge possibilities that need to be explored further rather than abstract certainties? So in other words, what is the knowledge base being disseminated to readers? Well, we suggested that there were diverse paradigms and conceptual lenses within the qualitative research tradition. Knowledge is, whoops, it keeps popping forward, I'm not sure why. Knowledge is deemed mostly to provide possibilities with which readers can grapple, rather than presenting certainties arrived at through more restricted technological lenses. And this is consistent with expansive, interpretive, and subjective views of knowledge that underpin English teaching. It's what Mack and Hararick and colleagues call hard to discern fuzzy concepts in English teaching. And many students in my lifetime as an English teacher have complained about English being too fuzzy. Some use of theory, such as Morton Robinson's Indigenous standpoint, offer what we suggest are stronger, more normative positions on what constitutes knowledge. And there are also a few new materialist articles that were very interesting and, of course, are becoming more popular. But these rely less on, they're less traditional in terms of relying on researcher interpretation and rather invite readers to draw conclusions. In terms of the efficacy deficit, the question was, do the articles recognise the complex contextual conditions that shape knowledge and practice in non-deterministic systems such as schools? We suggest that the research we looked at in the 139 papers were in fact promoting deep contextualisation, subject of course to certain conditions that shape practice. The articles that use Bernstein's classification of curriculum knowledge and framing of pedagogic practice, for example, or Dewey's student experience or Semler's creative interactivity, foregrounded what was going on in particular spatial, temporal and material contexts. And the authors illuminate that understanding what English is all about is dependent on teachers' capacities to bring the subject to light or to life and to light. So rather than presenting teaching as a how-to manual or what works manual, it offers insights into the adaptive professionalism of English teachers as they specialise. And I have no idea why it keeps doing that, as they specialise curriculum enactment for contexts of learning and teaching. And thirdly, the application deficit. Are the articles seeking to make visible the everyday world of knowledge application and practice transformation in English education? Well, we suggested the researchers' choice of the theorisations demonstrated the avoidance of the application deficit that Beester warns of by situating the research in paradigms that call for making visible the work of teachers, researcher-teacher and teacher-student collaborations. These articles provide rich examples of the relational, transactional, functional practice required for English teaching and to create change around understandings of curriculum, pedagogy and assessment. We did the same with methodologies and recommendations, and just very quickly, the range of methodologies and methods were quite fascinating, particularly as we come up to our Methodology Matters forum. A little plug there for the forum. The range of methodologies you can see here, mostly case study, ethnographic, narrative, phenomenological, hermeneutic, autoethnography, design-based research, action research, practitioner inquiry. Less of the surveys and some mixed methods were included. In terms of analytic methods, thematic analysis dominated, but we also had content, discourse, critical discourse, phenomenological, narrative inquiry, etc. So again, a fairly robust range, although definitely a reliance on case study and thematic. So our conclusions are that the articles are largely qualitative in nature, based chiefly on case studies using fairly standard methods of analysis and wide-ranging sociocultural and critical lenses, not surprising in the English field. Chung and O'Sullivan note, it is through smaller stories conveyed through case studies and teacher reflections deliberately sought out for research posterity that a rich tapestry of English teacher practice and praxis is woven. And this enables the journal to push back on the deficit assumptions around knowledge, efficacy and application in experimental research. On the whole, in this journal, we suggest that the research base makes the transformative labour of teaching highly visible, illuminating what might work here and for whom it might work. The recommendations in the articles point to the serious complexities of subject English as a field of study and practice, and the issues with adopting a technicist approach to assessment in response to the public call for an evidence base. And the suite of recommendations comes from a large set of rigorously executed, small-scale, detailed contextualised research studies. We hope that our analysis provides a model that might be taken up by others interested in analysing the research trends in journals in their own field or locality. Thank you for listening. If you would like to read the full paper, there she is. And any questions or answers or comments, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Jen. Well, that's a very rich study. We've obviously just had a little cross-section through it. Let's see what questions people have. I've got a couple that I'd like to ask as well, but let us start with you, Ren.
I don't know how I got first. Thank you for the presentation, Jen. My guess is you've had a bit of a run-in with AI while it was skipping ahead and back. You need to be kind to AI. I'm just wondering if you know of the work of Gamilaroi woman Tamika Worrell from Macquarie University. She did a thesis on called Prioritising Black Voices Representing Indigenous Perspectives in the New South Wales English Classrooms. I think she uses a fair bit of Morton Robinson and Indigenous standpoint theory in her work, but just about, having representation and voice in terms of the curriculum, the English curriculum, as a past English teacher. And there's other Indigenous scholars coming through with that English lens as well. So yeah. I just wonder if you've seen Tamika's work, especially on the conversation.
I have seen it, Ren, and in fact, your good self recommended it to me, and I promptly went and looked it up, and I've set it as a reading for my senior English course because it is bang on. Her work is excellent. So thank you for reminding me of that. I'm not sure that she's published in this particular journal.
She hasn't.
Yeah, but certainly you can see from the nature of this journal, her work would fit beautifully in there.
Great.
I will have to reach out to her and invite her to put a paper in. So, yes, what was interesting, I thought, in terms of the Indigenous theorisations was that it's still a very emergent field in many journals, I think. And, yeah, we're actually going to present a panel at the conference in Hobart next year, which is the AATE/ALEA. It's just a big love-in for English and literacy people. We do it every year as a joint association conference. It's always amazing. And we're going to present this paper on a panel of past and present editors and association presidents to talk about what is the impact that this research might be having across 10 years. And of course, the representation of Indigenous knowledges and theorisations is very important in that story. So thank you, Ren.
Thanks, Jen.
Natalie.
Hi, Jen. Thank you. Can I ask how long you took to actually do that spreadsheet? Because I was really motivated by what you did. I was thinking, oh, can I do something like that for an editorial I'm writing where I'm mapping what people have published in this journal on this topic? But how long did that take?
Well, it did take a while, but we had Libby, who was our RA co-author. She did a lot of that background work. But then, as we came together to look at the list of theories and the list of methodologies that were being utilised in the papers, we found we had to go and dig in some papers because it wasn't overt. And this is a kind of cautionary tale for writing as well and publishing for our own work, is that sometimes the theoretical lens can be obscured in the paper or the methodology is not very well detailed in the paper. So we literally, with some of them, had to go back and go, well, what is the theory that they're using? Where is this conceptual lens, And we had to sort of pull it out. Sometimes that wasn't possible, so we just left it blank. So good question, Natalie, but it does take a bit of time, but so try and get an RA to help you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Ming-Yan.
Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer. What a fabulous project, and I'm loving it. I have a question about whether you have already thought about that. I'm interested in whether there is some kind of a cross-tabulation analysis between, the three levels of three aspects of deficiency in terms of different kinds of studies. For example, focusing on pedagogy, focusing on assessment, focusing on curriculum or others. Whether there are any kinds of differences that we see there, whether, the research in pedagogy would be more towards what kind of, avoiding what kind of deficiencies. Yeah, thank you.
What a fabulous question, Mia. That's great. So we did do, in the paper, we do a kind of an interpretive account of what papers were addressing the pedagogy more so and what were addressing curriculum. But I think that's another layer to drill down into. Yeah, very interesting idea to see where the deficit challenges or resistance to the deficits were really taking hold. My hunch it would be in the pedagogy, not just because that was the larger number of papers, but because of the nature of this journal that really does try to do that deep contextualised messy sort of research, but that's a really great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ming-Yan.
Thank you.
Well,